And the climate policy caper is not getting any more sensible, is it? I mean, if only hypocrisy could take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, then we'd be at net zero already. In London, the rich and famous strode the green carpet to support Prince William's so-called Earthshot prize for environmental activism overnight. People who have previously shelled out thousands of dollars for outfits made the incredible sacrifice of wearing them a second time to demonstrate their commitment to recycling, looking after the environment, and not to mention their ability to endure great hardships to save the planet. I mean, really. While this was happening, back in Australia, the coalition has been going through tough negotiations to settle on a deal to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. The Nationals are yet to be won over, so negotiations continue within the government, and of course the issue dominated Parliament today.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that his record on climate change includes claiming electric vehicles will end the weekend, saying the world's biggest battery to store renewable energy is as useful as a big banana, and describing renewable energy targets as, quote, nuts? Why should Australians trust anything this Prime Minister says on climate change and emissions reduction?
When I give a commitment to the Australian people about what we're going to do on emissions reduction targets, we keep it. That's right. We keep
Members on my left.
Mr Speaker, we said we would meet our Kyoto targets, and we did, Mr Speaker. We said we will meet and beat our emissions reduction targets for Paris, and that we would stay in the Paris Agreement, Mr Speaker, and we took that to the last election. Those opposite took a policy to the last election saying that they wanted to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030. We said that was the wrong policy, Mr Speaker. It is still the wrong policy, Mr Speaker.
Just a reminder, this is 2021. We haven't just flicked back to some debate from Parliament 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I know what's wrong with the big banana anyway. Look, this is such a bizarre debate, isn't it? There's mainly about politics rather than practical decisions. I mean, most of the political, business and media world in this country certainly is fully on board with this net zero by 2050 promise, even though no one knows whether or not it's even achievable. No wonder the Nationals are having trouble. Think about what's going on here. Australia, which has been reducing emissions and meeting its climate targets, is being asked to do more by countries who are often doing less in order to meet a target now 29 years away. The countries that are doing most of the emitting, think China, are being asked to do nothing, while the countries putting the most pressure on Australia, the Europeans, are currently in an energy price and supply crisis largely caused by their climate policies. Just when these nations are telling us we need to end our reliance on coal, gas and oil, global demand for these fossil fuels is pushing prices through the roof. Global climate policy fantasy is smashing head-on to the reality of the situation in Europe right now. But get this, they want us to sign up to net zero by 2050 when the International Energy Agency earlier this year declared it cannot be done on current technology. The IEA's roadmap to net zero said the world can get to its 2030 targets okay, but nearly half the emissions that need to be reduced by 2050 will have to come from technology that is currently only in demonstration or prototype phase. So the coalition in Australia is risking the next election by signing up to a target that is 10 elections away and on current technology simply cannot be done. And we call ourselves the clever country. And have a look at some of the media, so the way some of the media gives us a take on these issues. Here's the ABC News website telling us on the weekend about Times Square billboard ads shame Australia's climate change policies. The campaign, or the stunt, was crowdfunded and it got plenty of attention from leftist media.
He's trying to get the world to pay attention to the failure of Australian leaders to address the crisis by raising over $150,000 to display this giant billboard in Times Square. It reads, for a limited time, come to Australia to cuddle a koala before we make them extinct. Sounds like a joke, but the message is deadly serious. And the man behind that message is comedian and host of the Australian podcast Irrational Fear, Dan Illich.
We are global pariahs when it comes to negotiating at these climate talks. We are literally the worst country. So naturally, we cheat and disassemble and obfuscate our way through these climate talks every time they happen.
Now, this Dan Illich bloke, by the way, was referred to in the ABC News article merely as an Australian comic, who they said was highlighting the federal government's contentious environmental policies. But doesn't the ABC know this comic rather well?
I'm talking pictures this morning with host of Irrational Fear and Bertha Fellow, the one and only Dan Illich.
The hard thing is they won't be able to afford houses because houses won't exist. They'll be underwater or on fire.
I'm talking TV, radio, on his podcast, Irrational Fear, and all over social media too. Dan Illich, now as a former journalist and perpetual satirist, you've always got a keen eye on federal politics.
Oh yes, he's a former reporter and presenter on the ABC's Hungry Beast program. Funnily enough, the ABC News article didn't disclose that the bloke whose stunt they were promoting is an ABC favourite, part of the taxpayer-funded broadcasting scene, where the comics are just as crusading on the same causes as the journalists.
That's why local comedian Dan Illich is setting up billboards in Glasgow to satirise our commitment to emissions reduction ahead of the major global climate summit there in several weeks.
It looks like we could be close to projecting that billboard onto the SEC Armadillo, which is the conference centre where COP is being held.
And in the ABC's coverage of this campaign, do you reckon any of them picked him up on any of his misinformation? His erroneous running down of his own country, pretending a country that is reducing emissions and has met its targets is a pariah while ignoring the world's biggest emitters? I think this comic will deserve a bit more attention when instead of Times Square, he can take his campaign to Tiananmen Square. If Illich can display billboards in China telling its people how China is destroying the planet, then that would be brave and maybe even pertinent. If he wants to crowdfund that trip, I might even chuck in a few bucks myself.